The Pac-12 is back, and it could have very real ramifications for the Zags.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Friday, happy weekend, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Gametime. Folks, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, folks, huge news coming out of the college sports world on Thursday, very early in the morning, like a thief in the night. The Pac-12 stole 4 programs from the Mountain West Conference in a massive seismic move for the college sports landscape, particularly on the West Coast. We're going to talk about this move, what it means for the Pac-12, what it means for the Mountain West, what it means for all of conference realignment, and of course, what it means for Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Let's start with the news. In case you missed this, came out on Wednesday late night. I believe Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports was the first to report that this was coming, that the Pac-12 had secured commitments from 4 schools in the Mountain West Conference. Those would be Boise State, Fresno State, Colorado State, San Diego State. It was announced Thursday morning. When he reported this, he said, it's coming soon, like you're going to hear about it potentially as soon as Thursday. And typically when a reporter says something's about to happen, it doesn't usually happen that quickly. But wow, I woke up on Thursday morning at like 6:45, and already the Pac-12 had reported, hey, look, we're no longer the Pac-2. We are now the Pac-6. Could be a great branding opportunity. Of course, they have to be at more than 6 in order to sustain as a conference. We'll talk about that in a second. But instead, what we find out on Thursday morning is that the Pac-12 has landed these 4 schools. And there was a lot of conversation over the last year or so of what the Pac-12 was going to do. And the general expectation was that they were more likely to do some kind of merger with the Mountain West Conference. We'd heard the term merger. We'd also heard the term reverse merger. A merger would have been basically absorbing the Mountain West Conference into the Pac-12, but that would be taking every school, not just the ones you really want. You'd also be taking Wyoming and San Jose State and Air Force and Nevada and some of those teams that maybe aren't moving the needle as much. A reverse merger would have been a similar concept, although it would have effectively been the Oregon State and Washington State kind of just joining the Mountain West. And what we saw instead was the Pac-12 was very adamant about wanting to continue to keep their brand. These 2 programs, Oregon State and Washington State, who incidentally are WCC members. That is a relevant part of this conversation, but it is not surprising to see them do this. They joined the WCC for 2 years. These moves are going to take effect July 2026. That is the same time as their 2-year deal with the WCC runs out. So if anybody was expecting or hoping that these 2 teams would stay longer in the West Coast Conference, this completely puts the kibosh on that. But again, I don't think that's ultimately all that surprising to anybody who's been kind of following this story. But regardless, when the Pac-2, when they sued to get their rights to the money, to the everything, to the rights of the Pac-12, to the media deal, the Pac-12 network, all this stuff, and with it hundreds of millions of dollars, which Oregon State and Washington State were effectively able to keep, while the other 10 schools who departed were trying to say, we still want voting rights in the conference, we still want this. And they said, absolutely the heck not. You left the conference, we're keeping all of this, and now we get to decide what we want to do with our brand and our organization and our conference. And that mentality was kind of what prevented me from thinking, they're just going to absorb the Mountain West and just kind of rename it the Pac-12. Like, that never felt all that likely. It felt like that would be the option if they didn't feel they had any other options. But again, they had a huge windfall of cash come their way, and they spent a whole bunch of it to get these 4 schools from the Mountain West. Estimates based on it's $17 million per school that they are paying the Mountain West to get them out of the conference. And then it's an additional 10 to 12 million per school as part of the scheduling agreement, which they have now backed out of. They now owe the Mountain West 10 to $12 million per school. So the math here, averaging it out, roughly $112 million going from the Pac-12 to the Mountain West Conference. We'll talk in the final segment what a lot of this means for the Mountain West specifically. What it means for the Pac-12 is they now have 6 schools and they need to get to 8. You cannot be an FBS conference. That's a football term. You cannot be a power conference or any kind of football conference at the FBS level without at least 8 teams. So this is now the Pac-12's goal. They got 22 months to find 2 more teams. That sounds like a long time, but they want to get this thing done as soon as possible because they also need to negotiate a media rights deal. They need to go to their partners, whether it's the CW network, whether it's Fox, ESPN, whomever they can get to agree to pay them money to show their games. And guess what? Those media partners, they're not going to agree to pay a bunch of money to a conference unless they know which teams are in the conference. So the longer the Pac-6 now goes without adding more teams, the longer they go without being able to, in good faith, negotiate a media rights deal. So expect things to move here as quickly as they can. And looking at who they might add, I think the obvious kind of conversation is around the teams in the Mountain West that they didn't add. In particular, I was very surprised UNLV was not on this list. UNLV is a very well-known brand. They are having a very good season in football right now. As I'm recording this, they're going to play Kansas on Friday night. We'll see how they do there, but they already beat Houston. Basketball, they have a rich history. They haven't been great lately, but they're in Vegas. What a huge market for the Pac-12 to be able to corner if they were to bring in UNLV, but they didn't. And if they were going to add more schools from the Mountain West, I think they would have done it all in one swoop there. So this tells me that their priority was the 4 schools that they added. Again, Boise State, Fresno State, San Diego State, Colorado State. And that UNLV and Nevada, and then going down the list, Utah State, Wyoming, et cetera, were not big priorities. So while I think UNLV and Nevada makes sense as grab those 2, get up to 8, be good, if the Pac-12 wanted to do that, they would have done it. The fact that it didn't makes me think they're looking east for some other additions. One of the reports, I believe it was Ross Dellinger, indicated that he believes the Pac-12 is effectively keeping seats warm for Stanford and Cal, 2 former Pac-12 members who are now in the ACC. However, Stanford and Cal signed that grant of rights agreement in the ACC, which means they're locked into that conference until 2036. Florida State is currently in the middle of litigation trying to get out of the ACC. The fact that Florida State can't get out of the ACC doesn't make me think that Stanford and Cal are going to just willy-nilly leave and come back to the Pac-12. That only happens if the ACC completely falls apart. And right now, there's not any indication that that's going to happen. Perhaps Florida State finds a way out and they get to leave, and maybe that does lead to a mass exodus from the ACC. Maybe it doesn't, and the ACC then scoops up, I don't know, let's say UConn. That could be an interesting wrinkle that changes some things here, but for right now, Stanford and Cal are not coming to the Pac-12 unless something dramatic changes with the ACC. That is an important distinction. It could also lead to SMU coming over to the Pac-12 if the ACC were to fall apart. But again, all that is speculative right now. So if it's not UNLV and Nevada, if it's not Stanford and Cal, what directions are we talking about? Well, I think you look at the American Athletic Conference. You look at Memphis. Huge potential addition there. They're good on the football field. They've been good on the basketball court, although having some issues with Benny Hardaway right now. Maybe you look at Tulane or Tulsa. Not super sexy from a basketball perspective, but they are good football programs. They're in marquee areas. Tulsa, you add Oklahoma market. Tulane, you add New Orleans. South Florida has been mentioned. I have a buddy who's lives right around South Florida's campus, but went to Oregon State. I grew up with him, and so he's pumped. He's like, please give me South Florida in the conference. I know it's super weird to travel that far, but it'd be great for me. I don't think it's going to happen, but hey, you never know. It could be the case. Could they try to get BYU back from the Big 12? I think that's less likely. I think the Four Corner schools are less likely as well. There's no reason for them to leave the Big 12 for this conference. It doesn't really make sense, but I think they'll at least put the call in, at least give it a shot. Do you go for a football-only edition like North Dakota State or even Hawaii, who's football-only in the Mountain West right now? And then, of course, the last question. What about Gonzaga? For starters, I think it's important to note that the conference is prioritizing football editions first. They want to get to 8 football schools in order to be qualifying as an FBS conference in 2026. There's no reason for them to prioritize basketball editions before they get to that 8. So until they get to 8 schools that are football focused, they're not going to be talking to Gonzaga. I feel pretty confident about that. But if they get to 8, and if those other two are something like Memphis and Tulane, let's say that, maybe then they try to look to get to 10 with basketball additions like Gonzaga or St. Mary's. I've seen people mention, it's basketball only additions. And I think that they mean that in the sense that they're not football schools, Gonzaga and St. Mary's, whereas I think that they are implying that they would still be full members in the Pac-12. Because let me say this, if the Pac-12 says, hey, Gonzaga, we'll add your men's and women's basketball programs, but nothing else, Gonzaga is going to pass. They may pass even if they get an offer for their entire membership into the Pac-12. I still don't know that it's that appealing to them necessarily, but they're definitely not going to do it unless the Pac-12 were absorbing all of their programs. So I want to make that very clear in case people are seeing, why would Gonzaga? No, I don't think they're going to do that. There's no reason to split up their basketball programs away from the rest of their teams just to join the Pac-12. Maybe they would do that in like a Big East situation or a Big 12. Even then, I think that's not very likely. Definitely wouldn't happen with the Pac-12. But I think the question a lot of people are asking is, will the Pac-12 pursue Gonzaga? But I think the follow-up question is, I don't think this is going to be all that interesting to Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga continues to be very, very hell-bent on the Big 12 or the Big East. And as long as they feel like one of those is an option in the not too distant future, I don't see them sacrificing that to make a huge move into the Pac-12. Because if they make a move to the Pac-12 and then the Big 12 wants to invite them later and they got to do it all over again, I don't think they want to do that to their student athletes, to their faculty, to anybody. So I think if they're going to make a move, they're going to make a move. And if they think that we should just wait it out and see what happens with the Big 12, who still seems interested despite not having all the votes necessary, or the Big East, if something were to happen with UConn, I think Gonzaga is going to continue to wait it out. But there's a lot of intrigue here. Let me read you this conference. If this were Gonzaga's conference, Gonzaga, St. Mary's, San Diego State, Memphis, Colorado State, Boise State, Washington State, Fresno State, Oregon State, and Tulane. It's a 10-team conference right there. 5 of them went dancing last year that are not the Zags. So 6 of them went dancing last year. And Memphis is not one of them. Memphis was a top 10 team in college basketball before they lost like 8 of their last 10 games or something like that and missed the NCAA tournament. 6 teams out of these 10 made the tournament last year, and one of them was a top 10 team that faltered down the stretch. This is unquestionably a better conference than the WCC, and I love the WCC. You all know that, but this is a better conference. Would I prefer BYU or UNLV or Nevada than Tulane? Yes, of course. But you can't be that picky. This is still better. However, it is not better than either the Big 12 or the Big East. And as long as Gonzaga feels those are options, that is going to be their priority. So are they still options? That's the question. Does the Pac-12's revival impact conference realignment at a Power 5 level? Does it potentially impact the Big 12's pursuit of Gonzaga? We're going to talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. That's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you are looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your car every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is also brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Folks, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you can check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster, and they do it for free. And LinkedIn is not just another generic job board. They help you hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those that are not actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. And in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users do not visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're not looking in the right place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is also constantly finding ways to make the process even easier, including launching a feature that helps you write your own job descriptions. So folks, post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And we're still closing out the week talking conference realignment after the Pac-12 snuck in and stole 4 programs from the Mountain West Conference starting in 2026. They will add Boise State, San Diego State, Fresno State, and Colorado State to the 2-team conference that is now Oregon State and Washington State. Incidentally, 6 teams, 3 of them, all of them have state at the end of their name. 3 of them are actual states, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington. Boise, Fresno, San Diego, none of them are states. Just a weird coincidence about the teams that are currently in the Pac-6 now as they look to build to 8. So we talked about whether Gonzaga would be interested in joining this current Pac-12 conference, whether we think the Pac-12 is actually going to invite Gonzaga. But what I want to do now is talk about the 2 conferences that have been most connected to Gonzaga in terms of them wanting to join that conference showing at least some level of interest in that program, And that is, of course, the Big 12 and the Big East. Does this move by the Pac-12, it's going to set off a chain reaction of events. We already know that. We already know if you're a program like Memphis, Tulsa, Tulane, South Florida, some of those other teams that are kind of, at the group of 5 level, again, to use a football term, that are have been clamoring to get to the power level. Those teams are all mobilizing right now. They're ready. They're trying to figure out, what does this mean for us? Is the Pac-12 going to send us an invite? If not, does the Mountain West send us an invite? Do we want to join the Mountain West? There's a lot of kind of waiting with bated breath right now. And that has been a thing that's been happening in college athletics, not just because of the Pac-12, which has now kind of created a new thing to wait and be kind of anxious about, but the ACC has been a big thing that has been holding up any future moves in the Pac-12 or in the conference realignment space. The ACC is likely why the Big 12 is holding steady without extending invitations to UConn and Gonzaga. Certainly the Big East is not going to do anything right now until they see what happens with the ACC, as the ACC has a lot of former Big East schools like Boston College, Syracuse, Louisville. If they think there's any chance they can get those programs back, the Big East is going to wait and see what happens there. But I do think that there is an opportunity for this move by the Pac-12 to create a little bit more urgency on the side of Brett Yormark and the Big 12 to potentially try to land Gonzaga. I don't see the Pac-12 trying to go get UConn. Maybe they'll make a call. Maybe they'll put in something there. I don't think UConn is clamoring so desperately to leave the Big East that they would join this iteration of the Pac-12. I'm not trying to say that dismissively. I don't know why UConn would be interested in doing that. So I don't think that that's going to happen. But the Big 12 is going to certainly be concerned that Gonzaga might do this. And I say the Big 12 is going to be concerned. Commissioner Brett Yormark is going to be concerned. He loves Gonzaga. He wants them. He's made that very clear. But there are other folks in leadership positions in the Big 12 who are voting on conference realignment who have not been convinced to add Gonzaga up to this point. It's possible because one of the arguments that those folks have had, and it's usually like, we want to wait and see what these 8 new teams that we've added in the last 2 years. But part of this, whether it's being said or just kind of is a thought that they're having that they're not sharing out loud. But a big part of this is the fact that they don't feel like they need to add Gonzaga right now. There's no urgency on the Big 12 side to go prioritize adding a Gonzaga or a UConn because they don't think those programs are going anywhere. It's possible that knowing that the Pac-12 is out on the hunt, is trying to build a conference, is trying to create, rebuild this 108-year-old conference to its former glory days, that could create a little bit of urgency for the Big 12 to say, hey, we don't want to lose Gonzaga to the Pac-12. So let's try to, make another offer here. Let's try to convince the naysayers right now to change their minds so we can get this team. I don't know how likely that is. I still think the Gonzaga is going to, if Gonzaga gets an offer from the Pac-12, they're going to go back to the Big 12. I think at that point, the Big 12 is going to try to do whatever they can to say, hey, just give us some time, wait a little bit, and we'll get you in. And Gonzaga is going to then be in a tough spot of taking an obvious chance to get into a Pac-12, the Pac-12, or wait and try to get into the Big 12. Part of this conversation is whether the Pac-12 gets back to that power conference status, which I think is a big part of this conversation. If Gonzaga feels like the Pac-12 is just another mid-major conference, made up of Mountain West schools and 2 teams that they're going to play this year in conference play in the WCC, then they may not feel like, hey, joining a conference that has 4 Mountain West schools, 2 former Pac-12/WCC schools, and a couple American Athletic Conference schools is not worth us jeopardizing our chances to get into the Big 12 or the Big East. And that's a very reasonable take for Gonzaga to have. That's a very reasonable way for them to say, no thanks, we're going to wait, we're going to see what happens here. But again, anything that might put a little bit more pressure on the Big 12 to make a move here is not a bad thing. Again, though, a lot of this still hinges on the ACC. If the ACC loses Clemson and Florida State and tries to rebuild by adding somebody like UConn, and then the Big East panics and adds Gonzaga, that's a semi-realistic scenario. I say semi because it's hard to know exactly how everything would happen, but I see that as being possible. If the ACC just completely disintegrates, which I don't think is all that likely, but if that were to happen, you would then see Stanford and Cal go back to the Pac-12. Maybe SMU comes with them. You would probably see the Big East do whatever they can to try to land Louisville, Boston College, Syracuse, those programs. But again, they have football. Those teams are not going to want to go independent in football. So there's going to be an interesting wrinkle in that. Does the Big East merge with some of the ACC schools and have a football wing? I don't know if the Big East wants to do that. There's a lot of kind of intrigue there. Does Gonzaga get involved in that conversation? Is the Big 12 scooping up teams like Wake Forest and Miami and places like that? If so, does that mean Gonzaga is now further down on the back burner? In that case, does Gonzaga just say, screw it, let's join this Pac-12 now that Stanford and Cal's there? They're not huge needle movers on the basketball side, but they're big, prestigious universities. So a lot of this is going to depend on what happens with the ACC. And I think until we have some level of resolution there, I think it's hard for us to really know what the future holds for Gonzaga. A lot of people out there are going to want Gonzaga to join this Pac-12. They've wanted Gonzaga in the Pac-12. They think it's the perfect place for them to be geographically, region-wise. Obviously, the competition is better than the WCC. We laid that out, especially if they get Memphis. Even if they don't get Memphis, if they just get Stanford and Cal back, you still have San Diego State, you still have Boise State, you still have Colorado State. Those are all NCAA tournament teams. If St. Mary's joins with them, you get another team there that's a quality addition. Like, this could still work for Gonzaga. And I'm not saying I'm anti-Pac-12. I think it'd be really fun. I just don't think it's Gonzaga's priority right now. And I know that it's not the Pac-12's priority right now. So until we have some more resolution on what's going on at the power conference level, specifically with the ACC, I think that we're still in a holding pattern in terms of Gonzaga's future conference affiliation. We're going to close out the show and the week talking about the Mountain West. Gonzaga has been connected to the Mountain West in the past. There's now no chance that they're joining the Mountain West, but what is this conference going to do, and how could their next steps impact the WCC and the rest of the mid-major levels, particularly on the West Coast? We're going to talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, Factor. Folks, fuel up on Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. So why not make today the day you kickstart a new healthy routine? What are you waiting for? With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every single week, you will always have new flavors to explore. So treat yourself to restaurant quality meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 and use code LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code LockedOnCollege50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. All right, folks, closing out the show and the week, continuing our conversation here about the Pac-12 snagging Boise State, Fresno State, Colorado State, and San Diego State from the Mountain West Conference. It was confirmed on Thursday morning. Those 4 teams will join Oregon State and Washington State in the Pac-12 in 2026, right after those 2, Oregon State and Washington State's tenure in the WCC comes to an end. And the question now becomes, what's going to happen in the Mountain West? Mountain West was an 11-team conference that suddenly became a 7-team conference. As we've talked about, in order to be an FBS level conference, you need 8 teams. So the Mountain West has to do something. They have 22 months, just like the Pac-12, to find at least one more member to get to the minimum 8. But there's a lot that is about to happen in the Mountain West world. For starters, the Mountain West not only has to try to add more programs to get back to 8 before 2026, they have to prevent other conferences from stealing the programs that are already there. And that's what I seriously wonder is what is going to happen if you're UNLV, if you're Nevada, if you're Wyoming, if you're those programs right now, you're kind of in a state of panic. What's going to happen to my conference? Am I going to be homeless like Oregon State and Washington State were? Who's going to snap me up? There's an opportunity here for other conferences to try to make some moves here. I don't think we're going to see any more power conferences grabbing any of these teams. Like maybe the Big 12 goes after somebody like UNLV. It wouldn't be shocking to see them do that. UNLV, again, already beat a Big 12 team in Houston earlier this week or earlier this season and is playing Kansas Friday night as I'm recording this right now on Friday afternoon. So maybe that's a move that happens there. Air Force is a team that's been talked about as potentially getting added to another conference, potentially. And so there's some potential moves that could be had here. But I think the priority for the Mountain West is making sure that they can stay a viable conference. They also just added $110 million. Pac-12 is paying them $110 million for those 4 schools. So the Mountain West has got money. They got money they can spend on their current schools. They got money they can use to entice other programs to come to their conference. Mountain West is not dead. This is not a killer strike from the Pac-12. If they'd added UNLV and Nevada, it might have been. It might have been at that point. You might have seen the conference just completely fall apart. And I should say this too. While I don't think the Mountain West is going to fall apart, the WCC is ready. They're waiting. Stu Jackson has been very, very proactive in the moves that he has made in adding Grand Canyon and Seattle U starting in next season, and adding Oregon State and Washington State to give them a home for 2 years while they play independently in football. They have been proactive in making those kind of moves. If they feel that something's going to happen with the Mountain West, they will strike in that situation. Obviously, the Mountain West schools have football, so that is a part of the equation. Could Stu Jackson convince Nevada and Wyoming and San Jose State and Air Force and those kind of programs to join the WCC as affiliate members outside of football? Perhaps, if things completely fall apart with the Mountain West. What I think is more likely is the Mountain West finds 2-3 teams, gets back up to 10 schools, and just rebuilds without the 4 brands. Losing Boise State in particular is a devastating loss for this conference on the football side. Losing San Diego State is a devastating loss on the basketball side. There is no debate that even the best case scenario for the Mountain West is really tough because they lost 2 of their huge brands in the 2 sports that drive revenue in college athletics, football and men's basketball. And part of the issue for the Mountain West is they're not in a great position to reach out to programs and try to convince them to join their conference because the Pac-12 is still on the hunt. Everybody knows it. If the Mountain West goes to Memphis right now and says, hey, we'd love to add you. We think there's a good value here in our conference. This is what our media package looks like. These are the teams you'd compete against, blah, 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 blah. And Memphis says, they're not going to say yes until they have a definitive no from the Pac-12. And I don't think they're going to get a definitive no from the Pac-12. And if I'm Memphis, I'm still waiting to see what the Big 12 says. Maybe there's an opportunity there. I don't think some of the better programs that could conceivably be targets for the Mountain West are going to join the Mountain West right now. I think they're going to wait and see what happens with the Pac-12, with the Big 12, even with the ACC potentially. So it puts the Mountain West in a tough spot. There are some programs that they can add that I think would jump on the opportunity to be in the Mountain West, but that are not moving the needle as much as some of the bigger names that they will pursue. One of the most obvious targets here for me is New Mexico State. And look, New Mexico State has not been good lately. They're struggling in football. They had a serious issue with their basketball team where they ended up canceling part of the season at the end of the year and fired the coach and had to rebuild everything. But the Mountain West already has New Mexico. You bring in New Mexico State, who's in Conference USA right now. It's an upgrade for New Mexico State. You now have these 2 schools. You own the entire state of New Mexico. There's a natural rivalry there. It's perfect. It's not the sexiest addition for the Mountain West, but it's a pretty obvious one. And I think we'll have most people saying, oh, I didn't even know they weren't already in that conference. But hey, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I think UTEP makes a ton of sense. UTEP has been on the radar for the Mountain West for a long time. They are a Texas school, University of Texas, El Paso. It gets the Mountain West into Texas. And I think this is going to be a priority for both the Pac-12 and the Mountain West, which is why I'm curious what that could do for programs like Rice, potentially. Maybe Rice is a heavily pursued program. Texas State, we talked about them. Sam Houston State, Tarleton State. I don't think the Pac-12 is going after most of those programs, but I think that the Mountain West will. I think Tarleton State, Texas State, Sam Houston State, Rice, maybe even Abilene Christian all make some level of sense for the Mountain West. And I don't think those programs will be pursued by the Pac-12. I think the Pac-12 is going to focus more on Tulsa and Tulane and maybe trying to get SMU. SMU would be the big winner if they could get them. But again, that's tied up in the ACC and their grant of rights at this point. The Zags are not an option for the Mountain West. In case you think we're going that direction, we're not. The Zags have no interest in a Mountain West without San Diego State or Boise State. It just makes no sense for them. I don't think that there's really any WCC teams that the Mountain West will pursue because the Mountain West is focused on football. The only WCC team that has football is San Diego. And yeah, sure, the Mountain West lost the market of San Diego, but replacing San Diego State with San Diego is a bad move. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We're not even going to entertain that any longer. Grand Canyon makes a little bit more sense, but again, they're not a football school, so I don't think that's a priority for the Mountain West. And again, the Grand Canyon obviously is tied into the WCC. I don't think they're going to abandon that to join this version of the Mountain West. Doesn't really make sense. Maybe Northern Arizona makes some sense. Maybe some other FBS opportunities make some sense, like North Dakota State, South Dakota State, Montana State, Eastern Washington. Some of those schools could make some sense. It'd be very interesting to see some of those teams end up at the FBS level from a football perspective. I think that'd be kind of fun, but I kind of don't know if that's the big priority for the Mountain West. They're going to try to focus on teams that are already playing at the FBS level if they can get them. And certainly they're going to prioritize trying to land some of those big teams in Texas just so they can have a footprint down there. But I think that it's going to be really interesting to see what happens to the Mountain West. Because again, if they think that they're having to try to add new programs while also fending off other conferences that are trying to add UNLV and add some of those other value adds, things could get pretty darn messy for Gloria Nevarez and her conference. And I'm very interested to see what's going to shake out. We're going to talk a lot more about this. This is not a done topic by any stretch of the imagination, but that is going to wrap it up for me today and for this week here on Locked On Zags. Folks, thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back next week. Got some mailbag stuff to get to. We'll talk more recruiting, more conference realignment. We'll get you started. We're going to just about to get started on our player season preview series as well. It's going to start towards the end of the month of September. Thanks again, folks. And until next time, as always, go Zags.